Well, it is time for us once again to dive into the history of yet another of Japan's famous samurai clans. For this month's poll on my Patreon, it was decided by my patrons that the Hojo clan would be the clan I cover here today. But the interesting thing about the Hojo that some of you may already know is that there was not just one Hojo family, but actually two. The original Hojo, who would come to play a large role during the reign of the Kamakura Shogunate, and the later Hojo, who would come to be a powerful force throughout much of the Sengoku Jidai. In this video, I will seek to cover both Hojo families, discussing both their rises and falls, how they sort of link together, and why they are both regarded as incredibly significant in Japanese history. So, with that said, let's travel back in time and start our journey off by examining the original Hojo clan. The Hojo clan, as it initially existed, was a local ruling family from Izu province. However, it is hard to pinpoint when the Hojo name first came into being. It is certain, though, that the clan's lineage can be traced back to the Taira family, specifically the branch of the Taira family that existed from Taira no Sadamori, a samurai lord from the 10th century. But although we can say that, we cannot necessarily say how many generations there were of this Hojo family before the appearance of a figure named Hojo Tokikata, who is believed to be the father of Hojo Tokimasa. Some even say that the name Hojo actually started right here with these two men, but it is still widely debated. For a time, the Hojo were by no means a significant family, being simply the lords of Izu, a minor province as it is, although it is situated in a very strategic location, just below the Tokaido Road that bridged the Kanto region to the capital, Kyoto. But in time, they were destined to become very prominent. Their kamon, or family crest, was known as a Mitsu Uroko, a pattern consisting of 3 adjoining triangles. Sometimes they are depicted as wider isosceles triangles, and other times they are depicted as taller equilateral triangles. Some believe this was a differentiation used between both the original and later Hojo families, but it should be noted that both designs can be found to have been used throughout the history of both clans, at least to some degree. The actual meaning behind the symbol is a bit more mysterious. According to legend, in 1190, Hojo Tokimasa, who had been secluding himself and praying for prosperity for future generations of his family, is said to have been visited by the goddess Benzaiten, a Buddhist deity of luck, among other things. Benzaiten promised to fulfill his wishes before transforming into a serpent and disappearing into the sea. This is of course just a folktale, but it is true that these triangles in the Hojo family crest are indeed meant to represent dragon scales. But obviously today, many people just know them by their more famous usage as the Triforce symbol from The Legend of Zelda. Now, getting back to Tokimasa, who was bound to become an extremely important figure. During the building up to the Genpei War, which would reshape the country, members of the Minamoto family had been sent into exile by the Taira clan and scattered all across Japan, with one figure by the name of Minamoto no Yoritomo being sent to Izu, where he was to live out his remaining years under the watchful eyes of Hojo Tokimasa. However, Tokimasa and Yoritomo would actually come to form a bond and trust one another, leading to Tokimasa's daughter Masako being wed to Yoritomo. Later, when the Genpei War broke out in 1180, Yoritomo would rise up against the Taira from his exile, now with the support of his friend and father-in-law, Tokimasa. As we know, Yoritomo and the Minamoto family would go on to win the Genpei War in 1185, and in time, he would be named the new shogun, a title which his family would retain. His new government he had established in the city of Kamakura would also now be regarded as the shogunate, or bakufu. And although Tokimasa was now part of this new regime through the marriage of his daughter, he still wanted more power. In 1199, Minamoto no Yoritomo died somewhat abruptly, largely suspected from illness or even a bad fall from his horse. Whatever the case, Tokimasa was quick to take advantage of the situation, ordering the assassination of a number of important Minamoto vassals he felt would oppose his rise to power. Having eliminated all of his potential rivals, Tokimasa would within a year be installed as Shiken, or shogunal regent. being that he was now in an extremely powerful position and that he was also the grandfather of the new shogun. The Hojo family was in a prime spot to dominate the Kamakura Shogunate, which they did for the remainder of its existence. Although the shogun was never a direct member of the Hojo family, the Hojo regency would be the ultimate puppet masters pulling the strings within the government. They were the ones who truly were in charge of Japan's first shogunate. Throughout the following centuries, they would cement their dominance of the shogunal government, both installing and exiling new shoguns as they saw fit. Under their powerful and well-established regime, the shogunate would, for a time, remain the absolute authority in the land. This eventually leads us into who is often regarded as the most significant Hojo regent, Hojo Tokimune, the 8th Shikain. Tokimune is widely remembered as being the leader of the Hojo regency during the Mongol invasions of Japan from 1274 to 1281, orchestrating Japan's defense against the incoming hordes of Kublai Khan. But he is also remembered for being the main figure who led to the rise and spread of Zen Buddhism throughout Japan, thanks in large part to his application of Zen to samurai lifestyle, which then took hold of the warrior class. But beyond these two significant achievements, Tokimune was also a very prominent statesman, not only being the Shikain, but also holding a number of other extremely significant roles in the government. He had been groomed for leadership throughout his childhood, and when he came to rule, he did so with what is said to be an iron fist. For these many reasons, he is seen as the peak of the Hojo regency. As a side note, because he was such a prolific figure, he was also made the leader of the Japanese faction in the game Civilization VI. Unfortunately, even with all of Tokimune's success, the end of the Mongol invasions would in the long run not bode well for the Kamakura Shogunate, as the end of the invasions exposed a major weakness that rested within the shogunate. Being that there was no new territory gained from their victory against the Mongols, the rewards or lack thereof given to those who had bravely fought in defense of Japan would cause a trickle of tension that would quickly start to build up. By 1331, this mounting tension coupled with the rise of the ambitious Emperor Go-Daigo would see the outbreak of the Genko War, which would succeed in toppling the Kamakura Shogunate just 3 years later. In the years prior, Hojo Takatoki, the 14th Shikain and prominent Hojo leader even after retiring his position as regent, tried to no avail to stop the rise of Go-Daigo and the many samurai lords who would in the end come to stand against the forces of the shogunate. He, along with most of the other members of the Hojo family, would all kill themselves following the fall of Kamakura. There were some other Hojo figures who did not kill themselves and instead pressed on into the new era, yet those that tried to rise up were killed, while others who merely wished to survive would end up siding with the Emperor Go-Daigo and later his new southern imperial court. These descendants, however, are said to have ditched the name Hojo and instead adopted the new family name Yokoi. This really is effectively where the original Hojo family finally reaches the end of the line. By 1336, Ashikaga Takauji overthrew the restored Emperor Go-Daigo and would later establish his own shogunate located in Kyoto. The Ashikaga would come to rule Japan for roughly the next 2 centuries, all while the Hojo name faded away into an old memory. But the Ashikaga shogunate was not strong, and the Ashikaga shoguns ruled only with a fraction of the power and influence that had once been held by the former Hojo regency. The power of the Ashikaga would inevitably come to wane, cursed by weak shoguns who were unable to rein in the ambitious Shugo, samurai military land governors. It all came to a head in 1467 with the outbreak of the Onin War, 134 years after the fall of the Kamakura Shogunate and the old Hojo clan. This war was a simple succession dispute that boiled over into a larger chaotic clash across the entire country as more and more samurai lords began to take advantage of the upheaval and pursue the growth of their own power. And although the Onin War would officially come to an end in 1477, there was no turning back. The country was at war with itself, and this was now the age of the Sengoku Jidai. It is here, in the early years of the period, we see the rise of the figure who was destined to cause the resurrection of the Hojo name. This man was originally a samurai by the name of Ise Shinkuro, but he is remembered more commonly today by his posthumous name, Hojo Son. There is much mystery surrounding him, as historians have even come to debate when and where he was actually born. Whatever the case, it is for certain he was born prior to the outbreak of the Onin War. Being born into the Ise family, it is believed he may have served the Ashikaga Shogunate, as his family was known for. The Ise family often found themselves in Kyoto in service to the shogunate and had garnered some prestige for this service. This had eventually led to Shinkuro's sister being wed to the Shugo of Suruga province, Imagawa Yoshitara. It was this connection to the Imagawa family that would in later years result in Shinkuro coming to directly serve them, helping put down internal strife that had arisen in their province. It is here he made a real name for himself as a valiant samurai commander. But although he had established a prominent position for himself within the Imagawa clan, Shinkuro wanted more. This would later result in him taking advantage of more civil unrest that was taking place in the neighboring province of Izu, the province that had at one point been the home of the original Hojo family. Seizing the opportunity, Shinkuro would lead an army of his own over the border and successfully conquer the province, not necessarily for the Imagawa, but for himself. Shinkuro was now becoming a lord by his own making. Thus, he is largely attributed to being one of the very first Sengoku daimyo who achieved his power through Gekkokujo. Izu would be a proper staging ground for Shinkuro to launch new campaigns into the Kanto region. At this point in time, Kanto was largely under the rule of the Uesugi family, but although the Uesugi held large influence, their actual military might was rather diminished by the many sub-branches of the family that all worked like cracks in the overall system, a perfect time to exploit their overall weakness. Marching east, he would secure Odawara, Arai, and Kamakura, coming to virtually control all of Sagami, to which his family would later move their main power base, making Odawara their new capital. By 1519, Shinkuro would die, leading to his son Ujitsuna inheriting leadership of the clan. Seeking to continue the legacy of his father's ambition, it is here Ujitsuna would do something unexpected. He would discard the family name Ise and resurrect the old Hojo name. The reason for doing this was an obvious one. The Hojo name was historic, a name that many already associated with power and influence. Resurrecting and adopting the name Hojo would go far to build upon the prestige of this new clan. So that is what he did, bringing back the old Hojo name and family crest. Today, we remember this clan as the Later Hojo, or Go-Hojo. Thus, Ise Shinkuro would posthumously become Hojo Son. Hojo Ujitsuna would press forth against the Uesugi, marching into Musashi province where he would secure Edo by 1524. Yet although the Hojo had seen success so far, they would soon face pushback from surrounding enemies, losing battles to both the Takeda and Uesugi and eventually suffering the devastating burning of Kamakura. But the Hojo would not relent. By 1537, Ujitsuna would finally overwhelm the local Uesugi family of Musashi and secure the entire province. And a year later, win a strategic victory at the Battle of Konodai, where the Hojo would extend their influence over Shimosa, which would then lead to further spread of influence into the Boso Peninsula. Ujitsuna would die in 1541. Having vastly grown the borders of the Hojo clan, coming to rule over the majority of Kanto, forming his clan into a true powerhouse of the region. The Hojo were reborn, and they were strong. His son, Hojo Ujiyasu, would inherit leadership of the family and quickly come to face threats of attack. In 1545, an Uesugi coalition marched with a mighty force against him and laid siege to Kawagoe Castle. But Ujiyasu would intervene, leading one of the most successful night attacks in Japanese history against his much larger adversary, scattering the Uesugi and cementing Hojo dominance. Throughout his life, Ujiyasu did not expand the borders of the Hojo territory as much as his forefathers had done, but instead, much of his time atop the clan was spent defending against various enemies, clashing largely with both legendary figures Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin. For this, Ujiyasu earned the nickname the Lion of Sagami. Near the year 1560, the Hojo and Takeda would join into a three-way alliance with the Imagawa, which would allow each of them to be free to expand their territory without fear of being attacked by one another. It was largely a plot by Imagawa Yoshimoto, who was planning to march on the capital. But as we know, Yoshimoto would be defeated and killed by Oda Nobunaga at Okehizama. Without Yoshimoto around, this three-way alliance would soon find itself in tatters, as both the Hojo and Takeda renewed hostilities. Both the Takeda and Uesugi would lay siege to Odawara during Ujiyasu's reign, yet both would be repelled, as Odawara had been built into one of the mightiest citadels in the land. Yet later in 1569, Kenshin and Ujiyasu would actually finally make peace with one another, cemented by the exchanging of hostages. This would result in Ujiyasu's son, Hojo Saburo, being sent to Echigo. Oddly enough, Uesugi Kenshin developed a fondness for Saburo, and would later bestow him with the Uesugi name. In fact, he was given Kenshin's old name as well, and became known as Uesugi Kagetora. In 1571, Ujiyasu would die, passing the clan on to his son, Hojo Ujimasa, who, like his father, would continue to defend Kanto. While 7 years later, Uesugi Kenshin would die in 1578, leading to the Otate no Ran, a power struggle between Uesugi Kagekatsu and Uesugi Kagetora, formerly Hojo Saburo. Ujimasa would dispatch aid to his former brother Kagetora, but unfortunately it would not reach him in time, as Kagekatsu would ultimately win the civil war. Several years later, in 1582, after the fall of the Takeda at the hands of the Oda and Tokugawa, Oda Nobunaga himself would be assassinated at the temple of Honnoji. This led to a fracturing of the Oda clan, as their newly acquired territories in the east fell out of their control, resulting in a chaotic land grab between the Tokugawa and Hojo. This struggle would be remembered as the Tensho Jingo conflict, and would result in the Tokugawa seizing Kai and Shinano, while the Hojo seized Kotsuke. Following this, both the Hojo and Tokugawa would form a non-aggression pact, with one of the agreements being that the Hojo were to receive Numata Castle, which at this point had been retaken by the Sanada family. Being that the Sanada had sworn their allegiance to the Tokugawa, Tokugawa Ieyasu had commanded Sanada Masayuki to relinquish the castle into Hojo control. However, Masayuki, who was obviously opposed to this, argued that the castle had originally been seized while the Sanada were in service to the Takeda. Thus it was not Ieyasu's to give away. This would later result in the 1585 Siege of Ueda by the Tokugawa, while the Hojo laid siege to Numata. In the end, the Sanada would actually be victorious, after holding out for so long that Hashiba Hideyoshi would finally intervene. Hideyoshi had taken over control of the powerful central regime following the death of Oda Nobunaga, and his pledge to the Sanada effectively ended the conflict. This would spark a grudge for the Hojo against Hideyoshi, which would only deepen over time. In the coming years, Hideyoshi would try to make the Hojo swear allegiance to him, as doing so would essentially be the final step in unifying Japan under him. But being that Ujimasa had become so opposed to Hideyoshi, he continually ignored all attempts made by the Toyotomi for a peaceful resolution. Thus, by the year 1590, Hideyoshi at last set out to bring down the Hojo. This would result in the final siege of Odawara. Knowing that Odawara was an incredibly strong fortification to take, Hideyoshi would take an unorthodox approach to his siege, and turn his siege camp into more of a siege city, with all sorts of entertainment and extravagance for his soldiers who were besieging the castle. With the massive forces of the Toyotomi and joined by the Tokugawa, Odawara was hopelessly surrounded, while attacking forces swept over the Kanto region. It was only a matter of time before, under the weight of Hideyoshi's full might, the Hojo finally capitulated. This would result in the suicides of Ujimasa and his sons, effectively ending the Later Hojo clan. In the end, the legacy of the Later Hojo clan is one of pride and defiance, having resurrected the Hojo name and ruling the Kanto region with a powerful grip. It is said that samurai in service to them were exceptionally loyal, and commoners treated extremely well, painting a picture that those who lived under the Hojo banner lived secure and prosperous lives, as the Hojo had continued to safeguard the region. In the aftermath of their fall, their territory would be given over to Tokugawa Ieyasu, who would then establish his new power base in Edo, which, as we know, is now modern-day Tokyo. Both the original Hojo and later Hojo are seen as some of the most famous families throughout all of Japanese history, with the original Hojo coming to rule the Kamakura Shogunate, and the later Hojo becoming one of the most powerful clans in all of Japan, coming to dominate the Kanto region during the Sengoku Jidai. They both provide us with some of the most significant samurai figures, powerful samurai governments, and both ruled over the same territory that would later become the most important region of modern Japan. Now, if you would like a say in which clan I cover next, think about coming to support the channel on Patreon. And as always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most informative.